They are so curious. That's okay. That was just a joke.
This is a multi-use sanctuary, rich enough for both wildlife and people in what is called the North American Galapagos. It is also a national park and playground for those who come for the enchantment of a place where even the water itself seems alive. But these waters have also seen hard times, and it's led to some innovative experiments.
I mean, this is one of the more unique sanctuaries that has no-take zones.
They're meant to operate together. We hope that they're going to be linked by movement of larvae and movement of animals on the reef. It's a true network of reserves. That's new. All of these activities normally take place in the sanctuary, fishing, other extractive sort of uses. But in these no-take areas, right, they're complete closures. You can boat through them, but you can't fish, you can't take anything. But that's also why we have sites along the shoreline. We want to make sure that we have plenty of monitoring sites inside the marine reserves and plenty of monitoring sites outside. We're really trying to understand the effects of what's going to happen due to these closures. This is the best piece of equipment in all of marine ecology, the 1 square meter quadrat. You're going to take your quadrat down and set it up and put it on the tape at certain marked intervals, and the marks are on your data sheet. And then you're going to basically sit and you're going to count the smaller organisms in here, and what you're looking for are the urchins, the sea stars, some of the little tiny ones. And everything is listed on your data sheet. And then when you're done with 1 quadrat, you simply pick this thing up, swim down the tape, and put it on the next one, and you're going to do a total of 5 per 30-meter transect.
And you do this how many times a year?
Each site gets surveyed once a year.
Once a year.
We start our season. It takes about 6 months, though, of solid diving to survey all the sites throughout the Channel Islands in 1 year.
That is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
I counted 17 whole strands of kelp.
So you just grab the whole kelp and then pull each stipe apart. 1, 2.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that we don't just count the plants themselves, we count each individual stipe, is we found in the past a good relationship between the number of stipes and the fish density. Not the number of plants. It's more important how large the plants are.
And is there an interaction between the urchins and the stipes?
Urchins actually eat the kelp. Mostly they prefer to eat kelp that has dropped and the fronds are all laying on the bottom. But in the absence of that, they'll mow down the kelp. And that in turn results in just areas that are just covered by urchins alone, and those are called urchin barrens.
The fluctuation from kelp forest to urchin barren is accelerated when large fish and lobsters that eat urchins are overfished, impairing the natural cycle of the kelp's recovery. The resilient kelp forest is a constantly changing vast habitat and shelter to thousands of species, small and large. It's a forest that reaches for the sunlight, growing 2 feet a day, and then fades, vulnerable to rising water temperatures. Over eons, it has diminished and rebounded. To the California sea lion, plentiful and playful after 50 years of protection from hunting, the kelp forest forms the architecture of its lush home.
Really nice, yeah.
Did you get all attacked?
Oh yeah, they're biting our fingers, biting the camera, biting our hoods. One time I felt something tugging on the back of me. I looked behind me and there's a sea lion back there.
I was laughing while you guys were filming because there were several of them coming right back at you, just kind of looking over your head, shaking, going, what are they filming? What's going on?
Yay, it was good. Good dive, good times.
Another one.
Excellent, excellent.
To both ancient and modern mariners, dolphins racing to the ship always means good fortune. For its size, the Channel Island Sanctuary is visited by more kinds of dolphins, whales, seals, and sea lions than anywhere in the world. These are our closest relatives in the sea, and with true grace, they rush to greet us.
I just can't believe the sheer number of them. Wow. Oh, beautiful jump.
Other animals are not as easy to find, but are important to follow.
Well, anytime you draw a line on a map with the intention of protecting or managing something, you clearly are interested in whether or not the animals you're interested in protecting or conserving are moving back and forth across that boundary. Unfortunately, for mobile animals like fish, we have very little information about how these animals move. The type of tags we're using, acoustic tags, or pingers as we call them, look like this. This is one size of an acoustic pinger.
This goes in a fish.
In a fish, and here's another one for the smaller fish. This is an example of an acoustic receiver or listening station, which sits on the seafloor where we deploy it, and it sits in constant listening mode. Each yellow circle that you see here in large, and then several of the smaller circles around, represents one of these receivers. So that's a receiver is at the center of those circles with a diameter of about 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer. To date, since 2000, we've tagged over 200 fish. In fact, one giant sea bass made the trip from the western end of Catalina to Anacapa in 24 hours across very deep water, which is pretty remarkable stuff. I mean, that's one of the exciting things about tagging fish, is that every time you put a tag on a fish, you learn something new. This receiver has a fair amount of data on it. It's going to take a couple seconds. Okay, and here we go. Each one of these lines represents a fish. The triangles represent terminal male sheephead that have moved from the shallower water at adjacent receivers where they were released out into the deep water. In the beginning of 2007, we should probably see the end of most of the tags for calicos, sheephead, and giant sea bass. And to date, with sheephead, both male and female, we've seen no movement outside the reserve. However, many of the fish that were tagged outside have moved into the reserve.
Word got out.
Enough,
Come
apparently.
over here, my buddy. Okay.
Have you seen a difference between the no-take zones and the areas where the sanctuary allows fishing and taking of these animals?
The system here of no-takes has only been in place for about 3 years. Responses of the organisms might take a little bit longer than that, but I can tell you what we expect to see. We expect the fish to be larger inside relative to outside. We expect there to be a higher abundance and those sorts of changes.
It is also expected that this abundance will spill over into the Channel Islands fishing areas.
So has the squid fishery been pretty consistent over the years, or does it fluctuate a lot?
Yeah, squid fishery is the #1 fishery in the state of California. They have these light boats that are just lit up with lights. They come up, they're actually mating under the lights at night.
Abundance has blessed the market squid, California's $31 million fishery, a bonanza since 1863, and a fishery regulated only in the last few years.
Chuck, you're all clear. I'll get the camera.
The squid's abundance is phenomenal. In one recent season, the catch was 70,000 metric tons. The next year, it fell close to zero. It wasn't overfishing, but El Nino. Rising water temperatures plummeted their numbers, or forced the squid into deeper water. Between natural fluctuations and a historic free-for-all, how had the squid survived? It's all about their life cycle. Squid live for only one breeding season. The females lay 20 to 30 long capsules containing 200 to 300 eggs each, and then they die. The fishery catches them on their spawning grounds, hopefully after their eggs are laid, to guarantee the next season's catch. Some fishermen understand the delicate balance and have regulated the catch themselves.
This is the way it was done from the start, by hand. They're not taken in large quantities. They have a chance to lay their eggs and reproduce in here. So this is pretty cool. We just take 2 ton and we go home.
For now, the rich Channel Islands ecosystem seems able to sustain the squid fishery. But since it all takes place at night, offshore, practically no one is watching. But what about something that looms above the horizon? Something enormous. Perhaps nowhere else in the country is an oil platform more part of a thriving ecosystem than in the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. This is home to the northernmost coral reef in the continental United States. Like all coral reefs, this is a living landscape and a critical habitat for the greatest diversity in all the sea.
We have a long-term monitoring program at the Flower Garden Banks to monitor the health of the coral reef. And we have shown that the coral reef here is extremely healthy. It's thriving. And this is in spite of the fact that there is an operating natural gas platform within a mile or so of the coral reef top of the East Flower Garden Bank.
To see just how this balance is maintained, Jean-Michel and Fabien have come to this natural gas platform where efforts such as zero sewage and water discharge are voluntarily practiced.
I am always very intrigued about the relationship that exists between industry and the ocean.
If you look out at the water here and you see all these fish, you see this beautiful clear water, and we don't want to change that. And certainly if we can do anything to help preserve the sanctuary, that's what we're going to do. We still need to generate energy. And this heats or cools 130,000 homes every day. And there's no reason why we can't do this safely. I mean, I can't say that, yeah, it's zero risk, because it's not. There is some risk involved in it.
Such types of activities can occur in close proximity to sensitive natural features if they are operated correctly. The oil platform has been there since 1981, and because it's been there such a long time, there's been a community developed that provide habitat for a variety of invertebrates and fish species.
The oil rig phenomenon is the same as with shipwrecks. Suddenly a new surface is available to the encrusting sea life, always competing for space. And the explosion of life creates an oasis. But as reassuring as this dive is, it's nothing compared to what awaits the team after the sun sets.
From what I understand, we're going at a very opportune time.
How they do it, we're not quite sure, but many coral species release their eggs and sperm at an exact time every year. One of the most spectacular events in nature. It turns out at the Flower Garden Banks, this happens to be between 7 and 10 nights after the full moon in August.
Here we go. Let's get wet.
The Flower Gardens Reef may originally have been formed from corals that drifted from Mexico hundreds of miles away, 15,000 years ago. The process is the same everywhere. Once a year, different species broadcast their gametes into the currents to be fertilized and carried away to start another colony. It begins slowly. Then it explodes. An upside-down snowstorm, living fireworks, the reef's hidden orgy of life.
Thing I've ever seen in my life.
I had to take her off the coral. I'm like, now.
This is the future for coral reefs. You know, as we all know, coral reefs in general, worldwide, are in trouble. What we need is that next generation of coral reefs to be produced.
These simple coral animals around the world simultaneously sense the full moon and release the future of their species to drift in the currents. But nearby, in parts of the Florida Keys, this precisely timed continuation of life has failed. Holly and Celine joined Dr. Margaret Miller as her team collects eggs and sperm during a coral spawning event.
We work at that site for elkhorn coral a lot because it's really the largest and healthiest elkhorn coral stand that remains in the upper Florida Keys. And we learned a couple of years ago that all of that coral, all those coral colonies, even though there's maybe a couple hundred colonies there, they're all a single genetic individual because it's isolated from other populations by, at least a half a kilometer to a kilometer. It's probably unlikely that in nature it's able to reproduce on its own sexually because it's just too far away from any other genetically distinct individuals. And so if we can get spawn from two different colonies that are next to each other, we have a pretty good chance of being able to get good cross-fertilization that way.
Dr. Miller allows baby corals to develop on tiles in their laboratory. And then she transplants them to help increase the number of coral colonies in the sanctuary.
The elkhorn coral is one of the ones that's most impacted by disease. And unfortunately, this is a threat that we don't understand very well in terms of what's causing it. We know that these disease impacts seem to be much worse than they used to be, but we don't understand what possible management actions we might take to be able to mitigate.
And then there's been biological changes. We had a massive die-off of these long-spine sea urchins in 1983, and we realized very quickly that they were an important part of the reef ecosystem. They kept the algae graze down around the corals especially, and with the sea urchins gone, the algae has been winning the war. But just bringing the urchins back isn't going to solve all of our problems. Coral bleaching has been a huge issue. A lot of the serious decline we had in coral cover in the Florida Keys happened in 1997 and 98. Both years we had a very hard bleaching. Water temperatures got too hot. That can go back to the global warming thing. It's something that everybody can address in their own lives. Everything that people are doing has an impact on the environment.
The Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary contains the third longest barrier reef in the world, adjacent to its 126-mile island chain. As a tourist destination, it receives millions of people annually, and 90% of branching corals here are dead or diseased, so careful management is critical.
If people can't come to see clear water, healthy coral reefs, and lots of fish, the Keys are in trouble as far as their economic future. The Keys right now are going through a lot of heartache to make sure that sewer systems, wastewater systems are up to a standard that's going to provide clean water for our coral reef ecosystem.
70 miles from Key West is one of the ocean's oases, where commercial fishing is banned. It's the Dry Tortugas National Park, called dry by mariners for its lack of drinking water, and site of Fort Jefferson that once protected the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico.
This place really is a treasure. It has more beautiful pinnacles and coral forests than any place I know in the sanctuary. It's a treasure that we need to protect.
Additionally protected by complete no-take status is the true Ocean Eden of Tortugas Ecological Reserve.
It's hard to reach people about the importance of the oceans because they can't see it. Unless you're a diver and you go to visit some areas, you really don't have the chance to see it up front and close, and that's what causes people to protect ecosystems is they know it, they love it, and that's what we need to do is let people know about what's under the surface of the oceans and then what's affecting it as well.
Trying to educate people that live in the Midwest and other areas that have influence where they put fertilizers and such on their yards. even though they live very, very far away, they have an influence on what is happening out here, and they can do their part to help us protect it as well.
But what your dad always says?
People protect what they love.
Mm-hmm.
It's very true.
Corals are not the only animals in the sanctuary that need attention. Green turtles in Florida and elsewhere are afflicted with fleshy tumors growing on their eyes and body.
This is that disease, fibropapilloma, been around since the late 1800s. We really don't know a lot about it other than it is caused by a herpes virus. It's the actual only globally infectious disease known out there. And it's found primarily in the green sea turtle, but it has been documented in all species except for the leatherback.
One of the sad things about this disease is the disease itself doesn't actually kill him, it's the sequelae of the disease. In other words, if that tumor gets so big she goes blind, she can't eat.
Right.
And then sadly, she starves to death. They also get these tumors, of course, on their body, and it can be on the flippers, and they get large, the size of a grapefruit. And they'll get several of those. It'd be like, you can imagine what it does to the aquadynamics of them being able to swim. They can't swim, so it exhausts them, and they starve to death. So again, the virus itself doesn't kill them per se, it's the effects of the virus and the effects of the tumors on the skin.
At the Turtle Hospital in Marathon, Florida, Dr. Doug Mader uses a laser to remove tumors from the eye of a green turtle that will then be released, freed from its burden, but not cured of this ocean-wide disease. While continuing efforts to battle the tumor epidemic draw attention to the green sea turtle, the most common turtle in Florida is the loggerhead, listed as a threatened species since the late 70s. The entire southeastern coast, as well as the Gulf of Mexico, is their domain, and a key study has been ongoing at the coast of Georgia for decades. The Grays Reef National Marine Sanctuary draws turtles to this habitat 17 miles offshore and 60 feet below the surface.
We call it a crossroads because you see a lot of temperate organisms, cold water species that live here right next door to their warmer water cousins. They're colder water corals and they don't build the reef. They live on top of it. The ledges that we have are comprised of aragonitic and calcitic limestone. You find that this rock structure is laying over the top of a strata that is not as hard, so it eventually gets undercut. And you'll find ledges that go back about 15 or 20 feet. You'll see these areas, they look like turtle garages. They're areas that are carved out into the rock, and they'll just rest there. One thing we don't fully understand is how they utilize the resources at Grays Reef. But we do know that we see a lot of turtles out there prior to the breeding season and during the breeding season when they've nested and go back out to Grays Reef to rest and forage.
Snaking through the marsh channels south of Savannah at high tide, Greg taxis Fabienne and the team to Wassaw Island, where the Coretta Research Project has studied loggerhead turtles for 30 years. Loggerheads will nest on Wassaw's beaches at night, all summer long.
Mike, how are you?
Hey, Fabian.
Wassaw is now a national wildlife refuge and the most unspoiled of Georgia's barrier islands.
You know, if you look at Wassaw's database, which is about 31 years old, we see an increase in the number of nests and the number of individuals laying nests on Wassaw. Statewide trends show pretty much stability or indiscernible decline. So that means, you know, we've got a handle on this part of the conservation end of it. We know how to make baby turtles, pump them out there into the ocean, keep the population up. Islands like this are really good for studying the turtles because you have a chance of catching the same turtles over and over again, which we have. Information we get from tagging returns or studies where we can identify individuals are even more invaluable because we've gotten past the part where we know what an average loggerhead does. We need to know what an individual loggerhead does now. When we get the turtles, we relocate their nests if we have to. Sometimes they'll lay them in lower ground. Above this rack line, say where that green vegetation starts is really where they want to go because that green vegetation is indicative of of places that don't get washed very often.
Not knowing when or if any turtles will nest each night brings little peace of mind on a tight expedition schedule. Fabienne can only hope for a bit of luck. To do the night surveys, researchers use only red light, the shortest wavelength in the color spectrum, to see it but not disturb the turtles.
A typical night out here is generally patrolling from dusk till dawn and 4 runs a night up and down the beach, and hopes to intercept any turtles.
After a long insect-infested night, less than an hour before dawn, fortune smiles on the team. A nesting female is spotted, still laying her eggs.
Yeah, the hormones in her system are kind of washed out right now.
The intensity of her mission permits the researchers close access without disturbing the process. Loggerheads are named for a strong skull, surrounded by muscle. Then another protective layer of bone so they can easily crush thick-shelled snails, crabs, and whelks. Growing up to 4 feet long and up to 400 pounds, the females drag their cumbersome bodies onto the beaches where they too were hatched, completing an ancient cycle. Loggerheads start to breed at 25 years or older and will lay 100 eggs in a couple of nests every 2 or 3 years. The eggs will hatch in about 2 months, also at night for safety, and the babies must fend for themselves.
There she goes. She's about to take off. Oh, you want to go this way? Just here.
Yeah, bees, basically.
This is the full extent of her mothering, and the sea then reclaims her. Outside the sanctuary, loggerheads face the threat of nets and the long lines of commercial fishing. The use of turtle exclusion devices, or TEDs, by the shrimping industry has not only helped protect the turtles, but diminished the bycatch waste as well.
We're not out here trying to hurt the environment. I mean, if there was a way we could catch nothing but shrimp, that's exactly what we would do. I mean, there's no advantage for us to catch tons of fish that just mash the shrimp all up. We have this small net here that we pull about every 15 or 20 minutes, and it gives us a reading, and we know from it if we're doing good or we're doing bad, or if we're catching too much bycatch, we'll pick up and go somewhere else.
All right, guys, you're alive too. You go.
These are turtle excluders. This version is what we call a hard TED, which has narrow bars, larger fish, turtles, horseshoe crabs, jelly balls. They all come out this escape opening.
How much have you been able to reduce the bycatch on these?
The hard TED, I would say maybe 35%. Reduces a lot of work that the crew has to do because all that stuff is excluded.
Otherwise, you'd have to clear the decks of all
someone would have
bycatch.
to pick through it. While there is some bycatch, it's nothing like the reports of old data that they have of where we catch 20, 30 pounds of bycatch for every pound of shrimp. I mean, not every drag is this clean, but most of them are typically like this.
Turtle exclusion and bycatch devices are limiting the staggering waste linked to the shrimping industry. But they're expensive at a time when unregulated shrimp from Asia have outcompeted the American market.
Back in the 80s, middle 80s, we were getting $6 a pound for shrimp. Now we may get $3. Not too many people are going to do it for the money.
While new technology can improve on reducing unintended catch, like turtles, once a fishing net is lost, it becomes part of an anonymous and deadly graveyard known as ghost fishing. On the Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary, off Washington State, a vibrant sea hides a little-known fact of life underwater.
Anytime you go out and put something in the marine environment, there's a chance you're going to lose it. Fishermen don't want to lose these nets. It's a very detrimental economic impact to them to lose one of these nets. They're quite expensive. They're hard to replace, and you lose harvest time when the net's gone before you can replace it. So the fishermen are our main source of reports.
The cold, nutrient-rich waters off the Olympic coast have supported fishing for centuries, especially for 4 Indian tribes, the Quinault, Ho, Quileute, and Makah, who have lived with the sea for hundreds of years.
Well, this is a very unique sanctuary in that we have coastal tribes with treaty rights. And what that means is those rights existed before the designation of the sanctuary. And the tribes are very clear that they were supportive of a sanctuary being designated if it didn't infringe on the practice of those treaty rights. So that is very much inherent in our regulations, in our policies, in our programs, is that we will work with tribes.
Our fishing is within this area, which also comprises the sanctuary. We can't move with the fish and go where the fish go. We only have a limited area here, so it's up to us to protect that and be responsible managers.
The Olympic Coast Sanctuary and the Makah have developed a program to remove lost fishing gear that is killing marine life.
We came together, we said, is this a common objective for both of us? Yes. How do we structure it? How do we train tribal divers so that they can participate in the removal projects? And so essentially building their capacity to do this type of work themselves.
Modern nets are made almost entirely of synthetic materials now, petroleum-based plastics and things like that. Below the surface, they can last for years, if not decades, and continue to do exactly what they were designed to do, which is catch fish. The marine environment is very good at recycling this dead material. It decomposes quickly. What we're seeing is probably only the damage that this net has done for the last several days or weeks. And it's been here, we know it's been here probably 2 years. The thing about things underwater is that the general public rarely gets underwater, and they don't see this type of material. I always say if these nets were stretched out along the freeway, in your neighborhoods, and had animals entangled in them like we see under the water, that there'd be a huge public outcry about this, and there'd be millions of dollars spent cleaning it up just like we do for our highways. But because it's underwater and nobody sees it, it's out of sight, out of mind, and we're just now collecting the information that can get that story out to the public and get some interest in solving this problem.
Also out of sight are the unique treasures of these waters, whose best chance of avoiding lost nets is that they're reclusive and shy. Jean-Michel's team is anxious to dive with the giant Pacific octopus and wolf eels, 2 icons of these rich Olympic waters. Wolf eels are actually fish that mate for life and are beautifully designed to eat sea urchins. The giant Pacific octopus is the largest in the world and can weigh up to 400 pounds. Smart and masters of camouflage, they're called the ocean's soft intelligence. When it comes to the predatory sunflower sea star, even tiny scallops are smart enough to flee.
We're very lucky.
with the Olympic coast. We recognize it for what it is and what it can be. And we said, we're going to hand it down to future generations in the shape that it's in now. And as you can see, it's a spectacular place.
Far off the Olympic coast, another species passes hidden. There is a sanctuary dedicated to protecting this one species in one place during one critical season. The Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary. This Hawaiian sanctuary protects the only breeding population of humpback whales in U.S. waters, here at the world's most isolated archipelago. Jean-Michel and the team are granted rare access to approach the humpbacks only by federal permit. Humpback whales are endangered, and 2/3 of the North Pacific population comes to Hawaiian waters. The whale's presence attracts a curious public, both onshore and in whale-watching vessels. Here, they compete and mate, and newborn calves gain strength for the trip to Alaska, where they feed. Here, too, they play.
Humpback whales are called singing whales.
Well, some of the whales sing, yeah. Male humpback whales sing, but the whales do a lot more than just sing. They're extremely aggressive whales at times. Certainly they're beautiful animals.
What's the population?
The population in this area is approximately 5,000 animals throughout the course of a winter season. Worldwide, we certainly know a lot less than we do about the whales here. We would guess it to be 20 to 25,000 humpback whales.
Declared endangered nearly 40 years ago, there was hope that their numbers would rapidly increase, but it has been slow. For each breath the whales take, they must rise to the surface, where they encounter the conditions that we impose on this vast sea. But at least here in this sanctuary, they have found a truce with us. And here we can share the dream of a future for the whale.
Let's go, we'll do it again.
Did you see it go right underneath me?
Yeah, just
I was like,
just above you.
I'm like, let's do it again.
And those guys are all competing for her attention, basically?
Yeah, they fight for that position closest to the female.
Okay.
So chasing, grunting, bubbling.
What are the major threats to the whales right here in the sanctuary?
The two main threats, human threats for large baleen whales seem to be ship strikes, collisions with boats, and entanglement. And unfortunately, it may be their personality. There's a little bit of their downfall with humpbacks. They like to play with things. I've seen them play with logs and buckets and pieces of kelp. And apparently, if there's debris in these patches of weed or seaweed out there, they may get entangled in it.
In these waters, the whales are extremely well protected. As they leave these waters and they leave American waters, you know, then it's up to the country whose borders the whales are around. And they do tend to be a border species, so they live near shore. But yeah, in Russia, there's no protection whatsoever, same off the coast of Japan.
So to me, it appears that when it comes to marine mammals, we're doing a lot better than we have done with the fish population, which is particularly the large fish, is in complete decline.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a worldwide moratorium on the taking of large whales in 1966. So since that time, one would presume that many of the populations have at least begun to recover from the decimation of whaling during the early 20th century. For the fish populations, nothing like that has been in place. There have been very, very few regulations, certainly worldwide, very few regulations. So the fish populations are continuing to plummet while the whale populations at this point are probably recovering. And the health of the humpback whale population is at least an indicator of what the health of the ocean is. So the fact that, you know, these whales are numbering around 10% of what they were before whaling days indicates that there are major imbalances in the marine ecosystems of the world.
So there is a direct link between the work that you're doing, the well-being of these whales, and the quality of our lives.
Absolutely, because while we may not depend upon whales for food, the whales depend upon the same fish that we feed on. The entire marine ecosystem is interlinked. So the study of one endangered species, whether it be a whale, a fish, or a shark, or an invertebrate, is very important because everything that we learn about each piece of the ecosystem improves our ability to manage the entire ecosystem at a sustainable level. And the ability of these whales to recover is in some ways reflective on the ability of the ocean to recover if the right policies are in place.
Stay tuned for more from Jean-Michel Cousteau Ocean Adventures. But first...
10,000.
15? 15, you think?
20, 21,000?
600.
20. 18.5.
24.
It's at least 40.
Look at it.
4,500,000.
650.
20.
650.
This textile would be worth about $500,000.
$500,000?
No way.
I knew it's just a blanket.
Laying on the back of a chair. Well, sir, you have a national treasure. Wow. A national treasure. Congratulations.
I can't believe this.
Jean-Michel Cousteau, America's Underwater Treasures, is available on video cassette or DVD with additional features. To order, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS. Play fun games and download gorgeous screensavers. Try our educational activities. Meet other unusual underwater creatures. Go on your own ocean adventure at pbs.org.
On the next Jean-Michel Cousteau Ocean Adventures, the exploration of America's underwater treasures continues as the Cousteau team reveals more of the national marine sanctuaries, from the largest to the most remote and inaccessible. But are the sanctuaries making a difference? And what secrets do these waters hold about our past and future?
Are you ready for another ocean adventure? Cousteau is waiting for you, and the boat sails soon. Next on KOCE.
Production funding for Jean-Michel Cousteau Ocean Adventures is provided by...
For each of us, there's a moment of discovery. We understand that all of life is elemental. And as we marvel at element bonding with element, we soon realize that when you add the human element to the equation, everything changes. Suddenly, all of chemistry illuminates humanity, and all of humanity illuminates chemistry. The human element. Nothing is more fundamental. Nothing